Hello, New York. It is really, really great to see everyone tonight. Thank you so much. I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. We are taping this show live. So, Jodi Picoult and Jennifer Finney Boylan, Dr. Jennifer Finney Boylan, because I am going to say that. I don't think either of you need that much of an introduction, but I'm going to say lots of nice things because I'm very excited to see both of you. Between these two women, we have 45 books. Is this 46 or is this 45? I wasn't totally clear going through.
You're making us do the math?
Yeah.
I don't do math.
Okay, sorry. So 45 books between the two of them, with also children and spouses and careers and all of these great things. Hale Prize from the New Hampshire Public Library, on top of everything else. Last 13 books of Jodi's have been #1 New York Times bestsellers out of the gate. Jenny is the Anna Quinlan Professor of Writing up at Barnard College and is currently, a Radcliffe Fellow. I'm not sure I'm smart enough to share a stage with her, but okay, fine. Delighted to share a stage with these two women because Mad Honey, how many of you have read Mad Honey yet? Okay.
Oh, great.
Wow.
To be clear, we are going spoiler-free, so all of you people who have not yet read Mad Honey, do not fear. I am not that person. I'm not that, because I actually have so many questions. I have your questions. I have my own questions. That said, Jodi, you want to tell us what Mad Honey's about?
Yes. So Mad Honey is the story of Olivia McAfee. Years ago, she was in an abusive marriage, and she took her son, Asher, and they left, and she started over. When the book opens, Olivia is now a beekeeper. Asher is 18, and he is head over heels in love with the new girl in school, Lily, who has just moved to town with her mom because they're kind of starting over too. And then one day, Olivia gets a phone call from Asher. Lily is dead, and he's being questioned by the police. And Olivia wonders whether the past ever really stays in the past or if it just keeps coming back to haunt you. When I think about this book, it's a book about how we become the people that we're meant to be, whether we can ever reinvent ourselves, what identity is, what gender is, all of those things. And the reason I really wanted to write this with Jenny is because she and I have had very different lived experiences as women in this country. And I knew if we teamed up to write a book about what it means to be a woman in America, it would be something that had never been done before. So I'm quite lucky to have had her here by my side.
You're lucky.
Readers, too, all benefiting. And now you guys understand why I'm super serious about keeping this spoiler-free. Like, super serious, because there's so much that happens in this book. There's a very cute backstory to this book and the two of you working together. So, and it starts with you in a dream, so you have to tell the story.
It starts with me in an apartment on 116th Street. No, Riverside, actually. It was 5 years ago. It was, in fact, May the 8th, 2017. I had this dream that I'm co-authoring a book with Jodi Picoult. Literally, that's the dream. And the plot of the dream was essentially what Jodi just told you. There were two voices in the dream. And there's a young girl who's been murdered, and there's the mom who is the mom of her boyfriend who's being suspected of murder. And in the dream, it was something about how much can you trust the people you love? Can you trust your children? Can you trust the people you love? So I woke up from this dream, which was very specific, if you don't mind my saying. Because, I mean, normally I dream like I'm fighting Captain Crunch and a giant squid at the airport or something. And, I mean, I don't know what your dreams are like, but they're not usually that sensible. Anyway, I got a cup of coffee, and I thought, well, that was weird. And I did my favorite thing, which is to go back to bed with a cup of coffee. And I got out my tablet, and I'm drinking coffee, and I'm kind of, doing the morning thing of reading the paper and checking the mail. And I went on Twitter, God bless it, and tweeted out, I just dreamed I was co-authoring a book with @Jodi Picoult, whom I had never met and did not know. @Jodi Picoult happened to be online at that very second, and 30 seconds. I mean, we followed each other on like author Twitter, which is really is a thing. It's actually a really cool thing in a way, because you get to just see what everybody's up to.
You get to pretend you know cool people.
Right.
Yeah.
Jodi wrote me back. She DM'd me like 30 seconds later. What was this book about? And I told her what we've just told you. Two voices. A murder, a mom. And she wrote back,
LOL, let's do it.
Quote unquote. LOL, let's do it. And I was like, really? So we batted it back and forth a little bit. There was probably, a dozen exchanges about, well, what could it be, and what should some of the issues be. But that was kind of it. But I should also say I was about to write the memoir, Good Boy. Jodi was about to start the book that became the Book of Two Ways. So we were both busy for a couple of years. But we agreed that in 2020 we would get to work. And
you know everything happened in 2020 the way it was supposed to, right?
Yeah. So it was going to be like late 2020. I think the plan was I was going to like move into your house, literally.
For
we
3
were
months.
Gonna,
We were going to organize it.
So instead, in March of 2020, I wrote Jodi and said something like, I don't know about you, I've suddenly got a whole lot of free time. And so we started it. And here we are. And I mean, to me, that's so cool. As a result of a dream, Jodi Picoult, who I did not know, is now my collaborator, my friend, and here we are at Barnes & Noble. So it's trust your dreams.
Which brings me to the structure, because we're alternating voices between Olivia and Lily. So there's a mom.
Olivia's the mom, Lily is the daughter. The dead daughter.
But we're also playing with time in a way. So you're it's a little bit of three-dimensional chess is what you're doing. So you're alternating voices, but you're also not necessarily in the same moment in time. And you do some very clever stuff towards the end, which we are super not talking about. But it's great. And if you're a writer, pay attention to what they're doing, because it's really interesting the way the structure works. But I want to talk about how you settled on the structure, how you figured out. I mean, also, this is a little longer than both of you usually write. Jodi, you tend to come in under 400-ish?
I'm usually around 400.
All right.
Yeah.
And so we're at
450.
Yeah.
450, I think? Okay. And Jenny, you've gone from super short to...
I'm more like 350.
Yeah, okay. And I raise this only because you've written, Jodi, you've written with your daughter, you've written 2 YA novels. Jenny, have you collaborated with anyone on a book?
I wrote a screenplay with Richard Russo 30
years ago, right?
Years
okay.
ago. Never produced, thank you God.
But more importantly, this is the first time both of you have really sat down with a novel. That's a entirely different, and not to say that YA novels, I'm not saying mean things about YA novels, but this is a really different experience. You are trying to encompass 30 years in these people. You are covering a lot of ground. So how do we start?
You start by, first of all, recognizing things about yourself as a writer that you never have to think about when you write alone.
Okay.
And honestly, I think that was probably the biggest growing experience. Start with, for example, the big thing that I learned is that I am a massive control freak.
Massive.
Yeah, like I had to house the story on my computer. And when Jenny sent me a chapter, I would put it in and I would, make sure it was in my computer. But that was the way I had to function. But the other thing that was interesting is there are 2 types of writers, right? There are
at least.
There are plotters who organize everything and create outlines. And then there are pantsers who fly by the seat of their pants. Right. And as Jenny has pointed out in other interviews, you can't write a book that is a courtroom drama and a murder mystery and get to the end and say, I don't know who did it. I don't know.
Although for me, that would be very on brand, actually.
So I convinced her to outline, which was also really important because we had decided early on that we would, for the most part, split the chapters so that I wrote Olivia, the mom, and Jenny wrote Lily, the teenage girl, except we also wanted to take one chapter and write each other's narrators. And we did that because we thought it was really good practice as writers to inhabit the characters' minds, but also because we wanted you guys to have to figure out which chapters we swapped. So good luck. Have fun. We started off there with Jenny agreeing to outline. And
if we didn't have an outline, it wouldn't have worked. We couldn't have done it. Because
but it also was important because, like you said, Lily's chapters go in reverse, which I'll let Jenny talk about.
Well, so we start with Olivia, and the last line of the opening chapter is a call from Asher. He's at the police station. Mom, I think Lily's dead. Right. Second chapter takes place the same day, and it's Lily's last moments. The last thing that happens in that chapter is there's a knock on the door, and she thinks, whoever is knocking is not going away. So then we go back to Olivia, and the Olivia/Jodi chapters move forward through time, through the arrest and the trial and all of the legal drama. You're thinking, okay, well, I fell in love with this character, Lily. And I'll talk about Lily later, because I hope everyone falls in love with her, because she is amazing. But she's gone at the end of chapter 2. You're like, oh, okay, well, great. So the next time you get to Lily is chapter 4, and now it's 1 week before she dies. And then the next time you get to Lily, it's now 2 weeks before. All the way back, and so there's 10 chapters of Lily. And the last Lily chapter is September 1st, when she and her mom arrive in town to begin a new school year, her senior year at this new school in New Hampshire. However, each of those chapters also contains a flashback to a time before that.
Yep.
So I worked the whole thing out on a giant storyboard. On
Which one might call an outline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I literally cut the whole thing up with scissors until we finally had it. And then we wanted where each of us leaves off to kind of dovetail to where the next author took over. But we also edited each other. Like I would send Jodi one of my chapters, she would edit it, and vice versa.
See, everyone needs an editor. If
No,
you're a
but-
writer, you need an editor.
But that was really important because when you're writing a book with two writers, you don't want it to sound like two writers. You want the readers to feel like it's one voice. And so the way to do that was for each of us to very heavily edit each other's chapters to the point where it's very hard for me to remember what phrases I wrote and what phrases Jenny wrote.
Right. I was reading the book last week, or looking at it, that in that kind of new book, new baby, so kind of proud moment. No, if you're an author, when your book comes out, there's just nothing like it. I mean, it's such a happy, happy moment. And I was reading, of course, my chapters, thinking, oh, this is so good, And I was reading something, and I was like, I don't really remember writing that. And it's just like, it shows how good the editing process was until I remembered that was actually the chapter that Jodi
I
wrote.
wrote. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to grab a question from Noelle Sullivan and ask you, how do you choose your characters' names? Do you ever name them for people in your lives?
I never name characters for people in my lives because that's so weird. Because then every time you type the name, you're thinking of the person, right? So I can pretty much guarantee there will never be a Tim in my books because that's my husband's name. Although I have had a Jacob, which he was an autistic kid in House Rules. That's also the name of my middle son, and his siblings have given him a lot of crap about that. But it's actually because it was like an auction and someone won and it was their kid's name. Yeah. It was not my son, Jake. For Olivia, I don't know why I like the name Olivia. It kind of came to me.
You came up with the names, or like working names. You said, well, when we first started doing it, you was like, well, how about if we have the mom is Olivia and the daughter is Lily? And I wasn't sure about Lily at first, but then it stuck, and then I couldn't think of her.
Yeah, and then you came up with the whole origin story
yeah.
too for her name, which was great. It's really it just fit somehow.
Okay. And then Jordana Gaines, who must be here somewhere because I'm looking at pink pen. There we go. Hi. Jordana wants to know, when writing a new novel, how do you come up with the detailed world in which the characters live in?
For me, that's a really hard question to answer because I never feel like I'm making things up when I'm writing. I actually feel like I'm watching a movie, and all of you are blind and, deaf, and you can't see or hear anything. So it's my job to communicate it to you. And it is really, really visual to me. Like, I just kind of close my eyes and I'm seeing it all play out, and I'm listening to the characters talk, and I just feel like I'm transcribing what they say. It's really weird, and it's why I say that writing is successful schizophrenia, because I get paid for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're having a seance or something.
Exactly.
And I feel the story coming through me, And it's really like that. When I'm writing memoir, obviously, which is mostly what I do, there's no challenge.
Yeah.
Generally, there's no challenge. Although sometimes, depending on how far back I go, I'll have to look at an old diary or ask someone about a detail. The fiction that I've written, well, the most recent novel I wrote was Long Black Veil, in which a group of college students goofing around get stuck inside the abandoned ruins of Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. And so I went to Eastern State and spent a couple days there just doing research and taking movies on my phone and trying to get the ghost story part of it right. I think there is this bridge between our own experience and the world that we imagine. And even if we're putting some characters in a situation that we don't know, we try to find something like it that seems to fit, that seems to rhyme with it in our own imaginations.
Yeah, and I mean, it's set in a place called North Adams, New Hampshire, which is fictional, but looks a lot like a lot of towns near where I live. So you can sort of imagine what a town green would look like, and what a 4th of July festival would feel like, and that kind of thing.
I know for me as a reader, I bounce between reading for character first or language first or story first. It really depends. I mean, mostly it's usually language for me. But for you as readers, what's the thing you're looking for first?
Well, the first thing I think you should look for as a writer is whether or not you've earned your storytelling.
Okay.
And that, I think, is any genre that you write, whether it's screenwriting, whether it's theater, or whether it's this. You can't get to the end and not have earned everything that you're trying to pull off in a novel. So to me, the logic and the structure of it has to add up. But as a reader, what stops me and makes me catch my breath is a really beautiful phrase.
Right.
That's where I just go,
A beautiful what?
a phrase. Like if
Oh,
there's
phrase,
something
yeah.
truly beautiful, then I sort of stop and have to take that in for a second.
I'll start with characters generally, and I have to hear their voices.
Right.
As a musician, I think I have a very musical sense of the world and of the way people talk, and so I need to get people talking either to themselves or to the reader or to each other, and that's what drives it for me is the kind of the music of the sound of the story.
There are two ways of looking at voice, right? There's the overall narrative voice, right? And then there's individual character voice. And I find that when I trust the writer, I'm just like, yeah, you can go anywhere, I'll follow you. I mean, so when and that's the reason I pulled out character when I just asked you, because I think there are so many folks who, when they come up against a character that they may not quite know what to do with, they sort of, it's that little bit of cat into water kind of situation, and they pull back. I actually can't even tell you the last time I had that response reading a book. And I mean, I read a crazy amount. Like, I really, I can't even tell you how many books I read in a year. I can't even tell you how many books I'm reading right now. It's just, when you produce a lot of audio in a week, you really don't know. When did you know that you had your characters' voices? Because they're very clear. And you have a pretty big cast.
We're laughing because I really struggled with Lily.
Okay, all right.
It was the only time I thought I was not going to be able to do it was, as Jodi said, I fly by the seat of my pants, which is not to say I write without a clue, but it means that I figure things out on the page. So I do 4 and 5 drafts kind of everything just to see whether it's a story. And with Lily, the first chapter, I must have written, I mean, you saw 2 or 3. I must have written a dozen versions of this character. My challenge was, so she's a teenager. She's in her senior year in high school, and I just don't know anything about teenagers or the world right now, because I'm really, my children are now in their late 20s,
right?
And I don't know anything about pop culture.
I can confirm this.
No, I mean this is how I just shield myself. I listen to Mozart and the Grateful Dead, and that's I'm like, the good thing about being a Deadhead, you never have to learn anything new. So I don't know. I was really struggling with Lily, and finally I figured out a way of bringing her. I kind of been, well, what would you be like?
Right.
Because I would not be an influencer at age 17 if I were 17 now. I would be, so Lily plays the cello.
Right.
And she's on the fencing team. She's like a giant nerd. But she has this wonderful thirst for the world, which you're lucky if you have when you're a teenager. She wants to know everything. She's a little precocious, but she's also just full of the life force. She's just she's a sponge, and she's just so much fun to be with. You just kind of fall in love with her. She has the kind of joy that comes from having suffered and having won that joy for herself after a great struggle, which I think is, speaking as an older person, I in my own life I can say is it's the great joy of life is the joy that you win for yourself. So I found my way into Lily essentially by trying to channeling some of myself into her, which is kind of the most obvious answer in the world, but delivered at great length.
Yeah, but that's the fun of hanging out with you, because we get the full-on Jenny experience.
Go on
that's
and
really,
on and on.
No. But hey, so
Someone
you did.
here's a college professor.
Yeah, well.
I think I'll talk
It's not
more.
me.
Let you hear my voice.
All right. It sounds like you answered her question, which is what was the hardest chapter, piece, perspective to write? But I'm going to ask you now, Jodi. What was the hardest piece for you?
I would say that probably the hardest piece was keeping the secrets that I knew were coming.
Yeah.
That was really hard to pull off. There are multiple reveals in the book, and so to make sure that you're parsing out the cards in the right way and just a tiny bit when you need to was really a challenge. And when I got to what I would call the biggest twist in the book, I was like, oh, thank God. You know, like I finally I was just like, I don't have to hide it anymore. Terrific, because that was really, really challenging.
Right. I can see that.
Yeah.
I thought you were. I don't want to tell you where
Please
you
tell me where I
struggled,
struggled.
but
Yes.
but the chapter of mine that you wrote also
Yeah.
is a chapter which there's a real. It's kind of the magician's thing where they're like making you look over here so they can kind of palm
Yes.
the coin over
Oh,
here.
right. I
So
know what you're
you're
talking
so
about.
Jodi did this very clever thing in one of the Lily chapters where she's making you look over here, and all of the facts are actually right here, and
Yeah.
it's like a. What was
It's
that
a
movie?
sleight of
The
hand.
Sixth Sense. You know that movie?
Yeah,
where,
yeah.
So after
Look at you with the pop culture reference.
If you wait, that was a movie from like 20 years ago, wasn't it?
Jenny, it's okay. 20, it counts.
No, but that's exactly what I'm saying, though, because there were so many things that we had to get right.
Right.
And so that really was a sleight of hand, and that was very intentional. I had to make you believe one thing while making sure that when you
I
went
was
back
so
and
glad that
reread
was
it-
your chapter.
Yeah, I bet you were. That was really hard. But writing Olivia was actually really pretty easy. She's a mom, I'm a mom, and she's at that really interesting age where her kids are not just her kids anymore. Asher's not just her son, but he is becoming someone who has secrets and things that she doesn't know. And for any parent, that is the weirdest time, you know, when you realize that you don't know every nook and cranny of your own kid like you used to.
Well, plus the beekeeping.
Beekeeping. That was the best.
Okay, let's talk about the research that went into beekeeping.
This is my favorite part.
I
Okay.
know.
Yeah. So
This is cool.
It is worth saying that when we wrote this, it was 2020. I have asthma. I did not leave my house for 15 months because I was terrified until I got a vaccine, except for one day on Saturday and Sunday when I would go and apprentice with a master beekeeper in a field in Vermont from 6 feet away with a mask on under my beekeeping helmet. It was amazing. I knew nothing about bees, but Olivia is a beekeeper. Now, you probably all know that girls run the bee world, right? You know, there's a queen bee. Well, if they're not the only ones, the queens, that work in the hive. Any bee that actually does any work is a female bee. So worker bees, forager bees, nurse bees, those are all female bees. There are male bees in a hive. They're called drones. They do absolutely nothing. They sit in the hive and they eat honey and they deplete stores doing nothing. Right. One day in their sorry little lives, the day that the queen bee takes her maiden flight, they're like, bro, it's time. And they all race out of the hive.
Bro?
They say bro. And they race out of the hive and they see who can fly the farthest and the fastest. And about 7 or 8 of them get a chance to mate with the queen bee. And this is the cool part because when the drone ejaculates in the queen, you can audibly hear the sound of his genitals snapping off as he falls to his death. He is immediately replaced by another male bee, and this goes on, this little orgy in the air for a few minutes. And when the queen comes home, she has enough fertilized eggs in her for her entire lifetime, which is really important because her only job is to make more bees. She lays hundreds, thousands of eggs every week. And when the queen is doing that, she is running the hive and she's doing a great job. But there are times when the queen gets a little old or sick and she's not doing her job anymore. And at that point, the nurse bees are like, it's time. We got to do something. So a nurse bee will take a larva that came from an egg, usually on the edge of a comb, and they will feed it only royal jelly. An egg that is fertilized would have been a female bee. An egg that is unfertilized becomes a drone. So they will take, for example, a fertilized egg, and instead of it becoming a nurse bee or a forager bee or a worker bee, any kind of worker bee, they will become, if they're fed only royal jelly, it will become a queen bee. And the hope is that that new queen hatches, kills the old queen, and takes over the hive, and everything runs smoothly. But, fun fact, if you feed an unfertilized egg, which would have been a male drone bee, if you feed an unfertilized egg only royal jelly, it too will become a queen bee.
Which is what happened to me. Actually.
We've hit craft. We've hit the research. Pia, though, is wondering about revision and how
Oh,
revision
my
worked for the
favorite
two of
This
you.
is Jenny. Yeah.
Well, this goes along with doing lots of drafts and figuring things out on page for me, is how you see what they are. Actually, at Barnard, I teach a class called Revision and Imagination, in which first assignment is write a 7-page story. Not 6, not 8, and we come in and we workshop that story. The next assignment is take that 7-page story and turn it into a 21-page story. And then we come in and then we workshop that. And the next assignment, take the 21-page story and turn it into a 3-page story. And then we workshop that one. And the last assignment is a 4th draft with the length unspecified. So that kind of gives you, and it can really be 1 page or 50, and that gives you a sense of what you're writing, what it wants to be. And you get to figure out what works. And if you don't mind my saying, this is not just something that works on the page, but something that works in your life as well, because I would heartily recommend the value of a do-over and a second chance. Because, I mean, it's never too late to become yourself, as I can tell you from personal experience. That I mean, and who's to say when you reach the final draft of the self ever? I mean, I don't even know, when would that be? Every day we try to remake ourselves, and transgender people like me, maybe the way we revise and remake ourselves seems more dramatic than what other people go through, but maybe not really. I mean, I can tell you the biggest difference between the before and after in my life, it's not going from male to female. It's going from someone who had a secret to someone who didn't have a secret. And I think the whole journey of life is to take the thing that is inside you, that is hidden, and find the courage to make it visible. And so you get another draft of yourself, and with any luck, you get to be the person that you're meant to be.
And that, I think, is true of many characters in this book.
Absolutely.
So you look at someone like Olivia, who was in an abusive marriage, and now wants that to not define her.
Right.
You know, and of course all the memories come rushing back when her own son is accused of something violent. But that question of are we the people that we were in the past, and are we the people that we're going to be in the future, is something that is really sort of endemic to Mad Honey.
If you could spend a day with another popular author, who would you choose? And someone did not sign this, and I'm asking it anyway. Thank you. Oh, that's okay. We're asking the question
I thought it was going to
anyway.
be Celeste Ng, who's like in the audience. Like, hi, Celeste. No. Well, actually, it's funny because I know a lot of authors.
You do.
Of the authors that I don't know, George Saunders, I think. You know, when you love someone on the page, it's not the same as loving them in person. And a lot of
you two would get on like a house on fire.
Yeah, he's a
No,
really
you really
nice
would
guy.
get on like a house on fire.
Okay, all right. So I'm picking him.
Okay.
I'm picking George.
I
just love his work.
Yeah.
It's just everything he writes amazes me. I think Lincoln and the Bardo is one of the most remarkable books I've ever read in my life. And the book he wrote about writing using short stories of Russian writers, including Chekhov and Tolstoy.
Okay,
I
so
would,
George Saunders for you. Who for you, Jodi?
So for my own selfish purposes, I would actually want to hang out with, right now, Maggie O'Farrell, but I'd want to be doing it in her office, and I'd want to look through all her Hemnet research, just because it
Yes.
would be very helpful for me right now
Oh.
for what I'm working on. But
Okay.
I would say if I'm going to hang out with someone, I'm
Yeah.
going to pick Margaret Atwood, because I've met her, and she is a pistol.
She absolutely is
Yeah.
a pistol.
Laura Paris, who is a current English teacher and your former student. Laura's question is actually kind of groovy. What's your best advice for young aspiring writers who are looking for more ways to find inspiration?
Can I answer this?
Okay.
I know she's your student, but I used to teach middle school English. And one of the things that I think is a grave mistake is forcing kids in middle school to read things that we consider classics. Okay? So
Wow.
I would say that let kids read whatever it is that they want to read. If it's baseball stats, fantastic. If it's the Guinness Book of World Records, okay. If it is comic books, fabulous. If it's Colleen Hoover, I guess go with it. But, you know, I'm just saying, like, I think that what you need to do is get kids to love books and to love reading, because that is how they begin to imagine themselves and what they can contribute as writers.
That was the answer I was going to give.
Sorry, I totally I
No, but
co-opted
that's,
your
I
own
mean,
kid.
you can't,
Yeah.
you really can't write until you've read
Right.
a lot. And what you ought to do is love reading. You should love, I hope if you want to be a writer, you should read, you should find,
Read
you
everything.
should be in
Just
love. You should be
read
in love with
everything.
with stories, yeah.
Genre doesn't matter. Just read
Yeah.
everything. I read a lot of V.C. Andrews as a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
And I am not the only one. Do not pretend I am the only one. I know I am not the only one. I went to middle school with plenty of, and yes, we passed around the same copy. I mean, y'all know what I'm talking about. Just read everything. I was reading Philip Roth at the same time. I was a very strange child, which is why I'm a bookseller. What's your favorite book you've written? And that's for both of you. It might be Mad Honey, but
Mad Honey was pretty fun, but it's really such a once-off. I mean, I can't imagine. We'll see. If I dream about something else, we'll see. I'll give you a call, Jodi. There's a book I wrote in 2008 called "I'm Looking Through You," which is about growing up in a haunted house.
Yep.
And
I love that book.
It talks about growing up in that haunted house, but it also uses haunting as this kind of metaphor for the way we occupy our bodies. And it was probably the darkest book I had to write because it's haunted and creepy in both, because they're actual ghosts, but also in the way the creepier part is the memoir of people who I actually lost,
right?
And the way they haunt me, lost in transition. It was a book that at the end of the day, it was very hard to shake off. It was, and when I was done, I was really glad. But I'm really proud of that book.
For me, it's Small Great Things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the fun thing about talking about Small Great Things is that the reason I wrote it was because I thought there were I wanted to write about racism, but more importantly, I really wanted to write about white privilege, because I thought there were a lot of white people in this country who just never considered the fact that the color of their skin gives them a lot of open doors and unearned advantages. And the fact that they've never thought about it is exactly the definition of white privilege. And I wanted that book to provide the tools and the vocabulary for a discussion that a lot of people didn't know they needed to have.
Right.
I learned a lot about myself that was not very flattering writing that book, and I had to learn how not just to say I'm not a racist, but I am an anti-racist. That is an active thing, and you have to work at that every single day, you know? So I wanted that book to spark discussions, and the great news is it has, and it did, and it still does. Mad Honey is the book that reminds me the most of Small Great Things.
Absolutely.
Because when I wanted to attack all the issues that we talk about in this book, it was for the same reason. It was to give people who are cisgender a way to have a discussion with a vocabulary they may not have.
Right.
It was a way just to get people to know what questions to ask and what questions not to ask. And, we've been on the road for like 3 weeks now, and the letters that are coming back are validating that from readers, which makes me really, really pleased.
So we've talked about your favorite individual books of your own, but who are some of the writers who've made Finney Boylan and Jodi Picoult the writers we know now?
Well, this is going to be a very different. I wonder if there's anything, if we have any other writers in common. I was raised on metafiction and the most kind of exotic maximalist writers of the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Borges, Italo Calvino, Vonnegut, all of the people whose work was just completely about inventing not only new worlds, but new ways of telling stories on the page. And I think that the heirs to that work are people like George Saunders and also Jennifer Egan.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of like pretty weird stuff, actually. The first writer I ever remember loving was E.B. White, though. I remember, Charlotte's Web was the first time I ever remember crying at a book, and it was such a it's just an amazing experience crying at a book when you're like 8 or 9 years old,
right?
And you're crying because something has happened which you believe, which you know is not real, but it was so real to you that you're weeping in this world. And I've gone looking for that feeling every day since.
Right.
And I hope to create it on the page. I don't want to make people laugh. I don't want to make them cry. Maybe not in that order.
Okay.
Can I tell my Charlotte's Web story?
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. Yeah. So I was talking to my daughter, the one who I allegedly taught how to write. And I said, that would be like such a great thing to have on your tombstone, that line from Charlotte's Web. And she goes, oh, yeah, what is that line again? Good writer, better pig? And I was like, why would I want that on my tombstone? Yeah. Anyway, just had to share that. The writers who made me who I am, the books that I remember reading when I first got out of college and wasn't being assigned stuff anymore, Alice Hoffman was the first person I discovered as a reader.
Right.
And I loved her writing, and I still do. I remember being really taken. I remember reading a lot of Fitzgerald when I was in college because I lived in his room at Princeton.
Well, there
which
you
was
go.
fun.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And
Just by accident, or did they give it to you?
No, by accident.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. He didn't leave like anything stashed or anything. I looked, but and I read a lot of Hemingway because I think he's a misogynist pig, but I'm really impressed by how he can say so much with so little.
Yeah.
But for me, after I discovered Alice, then it was like the Ann Tylers and the Sue Millers of the world who could write about relationships in ways that were so rich and strong. But by far, the writer who has most influenced me is the teacher that I had at Princeton and my mentor, Mary Morris, who is astounding.
So I have a little Mary Morris story.
Oh, sure.
Years ago, when I was a baby bookseller in Chicago, I babysat her daughter during an event
Kate?
because she was on the road with Kate, and Kate was little.
I used to bring her chocolate milk because she was pregnant with Kate, and I would make her drink it, and I could feel her kick.
Clifford the big red dog saved me because I'm not great with tiny people. They're kind of terrifying. And this is an author who's in my store doing a reading, and I'm just like, oh, your child is not going to okay, I'm going to the kids section with your kid. I'll bring her back. And I had a couple of booksellers come by and say, wait, did I just see Miwa in the children's section reading to a tiny person? Hi. And I will tell you, I am actually that auntie who does the voices. Like, I'm the full-body auntie reader, but at the time, it was not. Wow, I mean.
Well, she turned out fine.
She's fine. Yeah.
That's the good news.
I am the least of Kate and Mary's concerns, but it's still. I saw Mary at a party a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, and I was just like, hi, can I tell you a story about your kid?
That's great.
I hope this isn't weird, but it's gonna be. That leads me to a very long question from Rachel Dar-Cohen, and Rachel, respectfully, I'm gonna shorten your question a tiny bit, okay? But I'm gonna hand the card over to Jodi afterwards. What made you want to be writers? What made you love this thing more than anything? Because writing is not the easiest way to make a living, my friends. We know this.
It's the easiest answer. I can't not write.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
That's it.
It never occurred to me to do anything. I mean, I wasn't sure I'd be able to make a living doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I remember telling my parents that this is what I was going to do with my college degree, and they were very much like, well, good luck with that. And I left my parents' house, and I moved to New York City, and I worked in a bookstore. And that's how I guess that's how I started this part of. But I mean, I was writing, throughout college and high school. I was always writing, and I think it goes back to that Charlotte's Web thing. That when I had that experience of something taking me out of this world. It was mysterious and transcendent and glorious. And I'm still searching for that every day. If I can find a story that will do that to me and just kind of mystify me and leave me a slightly different person than I was before.
I don't think the shock is that I became a writer. The shock to me every day is that anyone wants to read anything that I write. And I mean, there's still a part of me that is like, is it just my mom's friends buying the books? I don't think she has that many friends.
No,
right.
Yeah,
but there really is. I would write even if nobody read anything I wrote.
Right.
It's just a lot more gratifying when they do.
Yeah, I mean, you do the work. You read because you can't not read. I mean, how many of you out there were the kids that if you ran out of stuff to read, you were reading the cereal box or like, see? My people.
Our people, yeah.
I'm still doing that.
Yeah, no, and I'm still like that. Are you kidding me? Although, this is where I'm going to make my little plea. If you're standing online, you can read a short story on your phone. You don't have to scroll through the terrible things. And I say this as a person who probably has spent more time on social media than I would like to admit, but you can, in fact...
What site do you go to read a story? Do you go to the New Yorker
I actually
site?
I just have books on my phone, and I just dip back in and out. I'm not using a site. It's just, I can't not have a book in my pocket. I will tell you, Liberation Day, the new George Saunders, phenomenal. I do want to bring up one tiny thing, though, before I ask the last question, because seriously, I knew this was going to happen. I knew we would just keep going and going and going and galloping across this. But Jenny, you are the first transgender American to have ever had a bestseller. She's not there. Not All There is, what, that was 2003, right? I mean, that was the first time you really, we knew who you were, and there was the Oprah thing and everything else.
And everybody was generally very nice to me back then because they hadn't been taught to hate. No one had been taught that they were supposed to hate me. back then.
Right.
It's like, it's really different now.
So part of why I bring that up is, one, it's a very important book, and it's beautifully written. But also, Tony is wondering if you have advice for someone who's struggling, who is like you, and is in a place where things are tricky.
I had an acronym at one point, TRUE, T-R-U-E. Let me see if I can remember. T is therapy.
Yep.
Find someone to talk to. It doesn't have to be a shrink, but someone with an expertise in gender issues is a really good person to talk to.
Right.
If you can't do that, find a friend, somebody you can trust. It doesn't have to be the person you're married to necessarily, and maybe shouldn't be. So talk. Find someone to talk to. I guess T is really talk. What's R? Read what you can. Try to find out what you can. You don't have to go through transition that second, that day. Have an outline. Jodi, don't just do it by the seat of your pants.
Look at how I've taught her.
You stands for you be you, which means you don't have to live up to anybody else's version of what a man or a woman or a transgender person is supposed to be. You don't have to be pretty, or you don't have to be handsome if you're going the other way. Figure out who you're going to be each day and be content with that, because whatever it is, it's not all going to happen all at once. And E is euphoria. Like, be happy, seek your bliss, and if you're feeling the pressure of that particular day, find something that makes you happy. If you're going through transition, having a plan and figuring out what you have to do day by day, month by month, is, I think, really helpful, and will take some of the pressure off you. I hope that's good counsel. It's kind of the best I've got.
Okay, so I have one last question before I let you guys go off into whatever else needs to happen next, because I would rather just keep hanging out with you. But this is the last stop on your U.S. tour. Canada and the U.K. is next. But what have you learned from your readers on this tour?
I think there's a lot of suffering out there. There's a lot of people who are carrying burdens and some of them are transgender people. Some of them are women who've been in abusive relationships. Some of them are just people who have a secret and they don't know how to tell other people. So the thing I've learned is that people are suffering. I'm glad that books appear to be at least one thing that brings people release and freedom and joy. So that's one thing I've learned.
I was going to be glib and say, well, I've learned that COVID doesn't exist anymore, right? Because we've been everywhere, and Jenny and I are pretty much the only people who ever wear masks anywhere. But
we went to Disneyland. We
10,000
to Disney
people.
World. Maybe we saw
10,000 people easily.
Maybe 10,000 people, and it was Jodi and me.
Yeah. So that was scary. I think I'm going to echo Jenny and say that the world's a weird place right now. It's really strange. People are pretending everything's back to normal. We're not back to normal. Nothing is normal yet, even if we want it to be. And I think that books continue to be this little tiny miracle, you know? I'm not the person who came up with this, but they are both mirrors for people who need to see themselves reflected, and they are windows for people who need to escape. And because of the way the world is right now, we need fiction that not only allows us to get away for a little while, but that very insidiously and intelligently educates us to be better people every day.
Like I said earlier, read everything.
Mic drop.
Read everything you can get your hands on. Read everything. Jennifer, Finney Boylan, Jodi Picoult, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank all of you for coming. It was great to see you. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.